Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It's Will Keller. Figured it's a good time to hop on and have a great conversation with my brother, Brandon Martin from seedtruth.com. It's been a long time coming. I hold you in high respect as a peer, and also I learn a great deal amount from you. So welcome. I'm glad you can come on and have a chat with me, brother. How you doing today?
I'm doing really good. Yeah, this has been a long time coming for sure. I've been excited to get on here with you, Will. I've been watching your work evolve and come to the table, and everything has just been coming together for you and the community. And I just really love the production quality you've been putting together and your presentations. So I've been real inspired by that as well. So it's a feedback loop. Like I inspired you, you inspire me. That's what we do. So it's really amazing. So thank you for having me on.
Oh yeah, man, my pleasure. And you're absolutely right. It is a feedback loop of inspiration. It's to motivate and elevate. And my first formal presentation was done at the Seed Conference, Seed Four, and you reached out to me, and I'm like, yes, let's do it. And it was on conscious parenting. It turned out really well, and that once I did that formal presentation, I'm like, all right, I'm going to do presentations. Like, I love the whole vibe of it. I love the process of creating slides and putting information out there. So maybe you can just take a few minutes about how you got started, a little bit of background just for people that are kind of new here. And then I want to talk about the Seed Conference real quick before we dive into these juicy topics.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Cool.
My background's pretty interesting. I grew up kind of in a anarchist, lifestyle. My dad was a natural rebel, and he created a compound known as Skatopia, and so we lived on the outskirts of society. So I was definitely kept out of the propaganda for most parts. Like I didn't have a TV until I was 16, and I was homeschooled myself, so I'm very autodidactic, and I also had access to very eclectic books because he was a really avid reader. So he used to read me the Satanic Bible, the Satanic Witch, just crazy books. And he made me read 1984, Brave New World, many books like this, Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, before I was even 12. So I had an awakening very early on, but like all of us, I reverted into hedonism in my teens, right? And it's kind of a natural process. We go through that because of our hormones and the biological impulses we have. And I really didn't have any way of solidifying all this knowledge that I had been you know that the foundation had been laid down for me in my early years in my youth. And then when I came across I think it was Kymatica, Esoteric Agenda, and a few other documentaries very similar to that, right around like 2010 to 2012. That really, got me motivated and interested. And then Douglas Martin introduced me to Mark Passio. And then when I got involved with his work, he just solidified all this knowledge that I had already, gained about anarchism, about reading anarchist literature, and about esotericism and about the occult. And it just like made this tapestry where everything was kind of disjointed for me at that point in my life. And then it just brought it together. And then, I became very, very proactive after that, and he has that motivational speech, he gets you moving, right? And that's how my
Hmm.
dad is. My dad reminds me a little bit of Mark with his motivation. Like he's very action oriented. Like, let's do this. There is no try. You're either going to do it or you're not going to do it,
Yeah.
so it's very interesting. But I always felt like a deep bond with Mark over the years. And even though I just feel like we've been brothers for multiple lifetimes, and we have some kind of deep spiritual relationship. I'm sure a lot of us do. And so, he took an interest in my work. And then I went to the Free Your Mind conference with my family. And then I was inspired by that to create the Seed Conference. And so I did it at my own compound off of my own land, and did it out of my own pocket, and just started putting out presentations, and got a few people together, and we just did it. We built all these, we built a pedestal, we built all these pews, we built everything, from DIY scrap wood, and we brought people in, and it was at a skate park. So people were skating, having a good time. And it was really interesting to do it that way. And from there, it just evolved and kept, moving forward. and I just kept stepping it up every time, each year. And I think the biggest struggle I had was actually with Seed 4, because I had intended to have Seed 4 at a university because I wanted to like go into the system, go right into the education system, because I know a lot of people that go to that university. It was in Athens, Ohio, and it's a pretty big university. And I wanted to put it right in their face. I wanted to put the truth right out there in their face. And unfortunately, they started to have the lockdowns, the restrictions, and all this stuff. Then they wanted to cut my seating in half and still charge me the same amount to rent the facility. And I was like, there's no way I can't cover it. I can't, there's just no way I could economically do that. So, from that, we decided to take a step back. And then eventually we did Seed 4 and got you on board, and, got Nathan Radet on board, got Mark Passio on board. And, it just turned out really well. We did it all online. And that was kind of the push to do some online conferences, which was cool. Big learning experience as well. So yeah, and thank you for coming to that, because your presentation, I get so many compliments on your presentation too. That one specifically, they really, and I share it with people all the time. Everybody that I know that has kids, I'm like, you need to listen to this. So
That's awesome.
yeah,
Yeah, and it was the first one to jump the conference off, so I think that
yeah,
was a good choice.
right.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And you guys have started like a trend, right? I mean, I'm one of the organizers for the Freedom Under Natural Law conference, which is online, and we were inspired directly from Seed 4. And then also the Shattering the Illusion, which just happened just a weekend or a few weekends ago. And I think virtual conferences, I think they're powerful. We can unite people from different areas. Obviously, in person is a completely different dynamic because you're eye to eye, face to face with people, and that's great. And I highly recommend that too. But I mean, putting together when I was in the music industry, I would help put together these music summits, and oh my gosh, expensive. There's so much
Mhm.
to do, and it's a different beast, in person events versus virtual. Um, so yeah, no, I commend you. We got a trend going, and hopefully people can get inspired from even the Shattering the Illusion and the Funnel Conference, and decide to kind of unite with people and put something together. So that's awesome. I can relate to you on your childhood experiences. My parents were cut from a different cloth. They were very much in aligned with anarchism, morality, objective morality. They didn't know it at the time, but my dad literally raised me on do no harm and take no shit. I mean, those were like literal words that I was raised up with. And um, so yeah, so I can relate to that. And I was on, growing up on a ranch, I was kind of on the outside of culture in my youth. I did go to public school and stuff like that, but even my parents' friends, we were on the outskirts of a suburb. They called my parents the Beverly Hillbillies. And so but I learned a lot from my childhood, but then getting into my teens, started getting into music, and that definitely sprung me into a little more hedonism, which, looking back on it now, I learned a
Mhm.
great deal about myself. And when I kind of transcend that state of mind, it was like a death of a state of consciousness, a level of consciousness, and a lot of lessons and a lot of refining the ego in those days. So it all depends on the person, right? I mean, this is part of the human element. We take elements. You could take fire and wood, create a fire, and then you can add metal, and humans can forge a tool from that. So transmutation, this is what it's all about. It's all about moving energy. And looking at the Seed Conference, how you just started with your own area, money out of your own pocket, supplies and material on your property, and what you can work with, and you did what you could then, and then upgrade it and progress forward on the next events. So that's awesome, man.
Yeah, it was really interesting doing that process, and it's cool about your background. I didn't know that. That's really interesting. So we can definitely relate and bond on that.
Yeah.
Being kind of the black sheep of society and having kind of a family that's that way as well. I did go to a little bit of public school, though I will clarify that. It was more, let's see, I think after 6th grade I started doing homeschool, but I did a lot of traveling too, so it was hard for me to even stay in school and be able to pass because I was always, I was going all over Europe, all over the States. So, I got a lot of experience just doing a lot of traveling, and I was involved in the underground punk scene and metal scene and skateboarding scene for a really long time. So yeah, I got a lot of different unique perspectives, which I learned to transmute. So like when most people who know about Skatopia, when they look at me, they're like, how the heck did you turn out to be such a moral person coming out of such a wild place, And I think that it's just like what you're saying. Like I just took the tools. I had some natural spiritual armor. I personally think I've been here multiple times and I've chosen to come back here to do this work intentionally because of the suffering that we're in. And I've had like past life experiences through my dreams and through therapeutic sessions. And I just think I have an old soul in a way, and I've gained a lot of wisdom. And that's why it related to me very quickly and very easily, whereas most people probably would still struggle with this because a lot of this work is what I consider to be a multi-lifetime work. Sometimes, some people can take to it really quickly, but this journey is not just over, so easily as you can do it all in one lifetime, And I think that's one of the problems we see in the world is people want instant gratification.
Mhm.
They want instant enlightenment, right? And I'm not saying you can't get that because I know that there are some occasions of that, but it's very rare. It's extremely rare. Most people are not going to get that, especially with the condition that they're in, where they've been completely, dehumanized and completely demoralized and, biologically attacked constantly, epidysgenically attacked over and over and over for tens of thousands of years, So it's like, it's going to take it takes a lot of hard work. I mean, we call it the one great work for a reason, and people don't get that. I mean, even just doing this live show, there's so many things that go into this, and there's a lot of work that goes into it that a lot of people would overlook, right?
Mhm.
And I mean, when I first started doing it, I was very naive. I was like, oh yeah, I can just, get this and get that and get on it. And it worked. You can do that with cheap mics and cheap mixing board and you can do it, right? But you have to progress, like you're saying. You got to take a step forward. You got to, try to up your game, and this is something I would say to that is, when you're a wise person, you have a duty to share that wisdom, right? You have a moral obligation to make other people around you. I shouldn't say make, but you should inspire other people around you to become wise as well. That's what true education is about. It's not about creating followers. It's about creating more teachers. It's about creating more wise people in the world, more learned men and women, and I think that's one of the downfalls of the education system is that it's all about obedience. It's all about creating a worker class, which has been adopted by the Prussian education system, obviously. But we've seen this even before we adopted that for hundreds of years, that all of our education systems have all failed, at some way or another. The only ones that succeeded were the mystery schools. Those were the only ones that really pushed us into looking at education as a way of evolving the species, a way of creating a higher type, a way of not only staying in harmony with natural law and morality, but also a way of giving you purpose within society, showing that you have a purpose within society to give you a good understanding of how to use your spiritual currency wisely here, because time is sacred and you do have limited amount of time as far as in this form. So you should spend it wisely, right?
Mhm. Yeah. Oh, no, yeah, good point. You touched on so many good things. And I make the distinguish uh from the great work and the one great work because
Right.
it was really big in the mystery traditions as well, right? It's about the individual work then radiates to the external. And when I see people, there's a lot of organizations that just want to gather numbers, right? Change is in the we. We create change, create change. And I actually say it's the I, because it's what every individual does. They have to do that internal work, and then it can output in moral behavior. And once more people do that, then that becomes the aggregated result. um
Right.
and the form that I'm talking about is, we can create change, is protests, people in
Mhm.
gatherings and going out to events. With this state of mind, people think they just go out there and hold a sign. Well, they did their part, when in reality, the work is done internally.
That's right. Absolutely. And well said. Yeah, it's a big issue, right? Because you don't want to identify with any type of group think, right? And group think, the things with groups is that they're really easily controlled.
Mhm.
They're much easier to control than an individual, especially an educated and an awakened individual, a sovereign individual. Um, so, a sovereign individual that walks into a group where it's just herd mentality and herd think, the morals of that group can be easily swayed by just a few people, maybe even one person, if they have enough energy behind them, if they have the right charisma, if they have the right persona that they can put on for the group. And that's why like groups have always been easily used as psyops and as uh, as a means to actually dictate the way that policies are being formed in a political system or in a state, because you can easily just manipulate the minds of the group. See, the thing is that each individual isn't attacked, right, by the dark occult. They attack groups.
Mm.
They attack us all as a whole. They're not like specifically targeting you or me. Sometimes they do. I'm not saying that they don't, but it's more rare. They do that for specific people, but they're not doing that across the board to every single person on the planet individually, you
Mhm.
know, all at the same time. What they're doing is they're targeting groups. And in that way, they can sway those groups and move them. It's just like working on a ranch, right? Working with sheep or something like this. It's easy to manipulate the way the herd is going in a group, but as soon as you get that one that runs off, it breaks the whole thing, and you're like, oh, what am I going to do?
Yep,
And it can be very difficult to control that, right? Um,
exactly.
so groups are really easily controlled. So it is a big issue. So yeah, stay out of group politics and group identity, because like what you're saying, getting involved in that, like going out and just raising your picket signs, that's not going to change anything. We've seen where that's taken us before, you know. And the other thing is that in groups, you get energized. You have a kind of youthful like experience of wanting to be active, right? But yet you haven't gained the wisdom and the responsibility to know what you need to be doing with proactivity. You haven't gained the understanding of natural law and morality for most people, right? So they go out there and they want to change the system, but they don't understand how the system works. They don't understand the fundamental dogmatic axioms that people are believing in. They don't understand causality that takes place in the mind, right? They
Mhm.
just go out there and they're fighting the symptoms of everything. Change this policy, right? Left and right. And they're applying band-aids to someone who is constantly reopening their wound over and over and over, not realizing that you have to stop the person in the mind from wanting to cut themselves over and over and over. You don't want to just keep mass producing band-aids for that wound, right? It's not going to
Exactly.
solve the sickness, the psychopathology of the mind. So that's a big thing. So I think you brought up a good point there.
Yeah, no, you did too, with institutionalized paradigms. They project and they attack worldviews that then people identify with, right? That, like you said,
Right.
it's the group think itself. Once someone engages in the initiation process of internal development, you're learning how to think. And um, I th- I think the domestication of humanity. This was kind of a topic that we talked about. Let's explore this a little bit, because it's obvious that, especially men, but women as well in their own way, it's all about declawing and neutering and spading. The men first, because the men are the strength, as well, but also attacking the feminine, which is care and that nurturing aspect. So people are getting hit from both directions, and it this is why people call them cattle or sheep, right? It really is domesticating human beings just like you would animals.
Right. It reminds me of Animal Farm, right? The book Animal
Exactly.
Farm. And that's what we're experiencing at some level. Obviously, a multitude of different allegorical stories and films, but yeah, that just it brings to mind Animal Farm. And yeah, the domestication of humanity has been almost perfected, I would say. Like they've mastered this because they have occult knowledge about human psychology that they've been holding for hundreds of thousands of years. There's just no doubt about it.
Hmm.
And when you get into the occult studies of the mystery schools, you understand that, this knowledge has been around for a long time. And that's really what it comes down to, is understanding occult psychology, not just modern psychology, because modern psychology is definitely not, in the realms of the esoteric workings of real psychology. So let's take a look at like Carl Jung and Freud, right? They kind of were just rediscovering what the ancient minds had discovered and perfected thousands of years before this.
Yep.
They had already understood this, and the degradation of that knowledge and the assimilation, obliteration, and the institutionalizing of that knowledge and the intentional withholding of that knowledge has been a huge issue that has helped to domesticate us, because it creates a power differential between those who have the knowledge and those who do not, right? And
Yeah.
that's the big thing. And it's so easy to domesticate someone, right? You do it through fear-based mind control, right? You do it through trauma. And that's what we do. We keep ourselves in trauma all the time. And I don't even want to point at the elite so much anymore, right? I mean, I've been saying this for many years. It's really about all of our neighbors. It's really about ourselves. Like you said, it's about me. Where have I consented into this? Where have I done this? Where have I been contributing to this system? So it's really the masses. It's the masses of the people, because if they stood up, the chessboard would flip. If we all got educated, the elites have no power. I
Exactly.
mean, they really don't. And so, I obviously point out the elites because that is true. They have the mass majority of economic power, global power with globalization, geopolitics, and they have a lot of sway in the world. But it's nothing compared to the masses of the individuals. It has no comparison. And if we had a paradigm shift, right, in
Hmm.
consciousness, and that's what this really comes down to. And this, you've said it many times. It's all about working on your consciousness. Getting out of the inversion principles. The inverted principles of the satanic mindset, and getting more educated, more enlightened, and working towards not only bettering yourself and healing your own traumas, but also getting proactive once you've done that. You don't want to go out and start casting stones if you're living in a glass house, obviously. Well,
Yeah.
I'm not living in a glass house anymore, right? I don't think you are either. So we can do this. We've done our work. So it's really important for people to understand that. And I brought that up because most of the people that are going out in the groups, right, with the picket signs and protesting, they're living in glass houses,
Yeah.
and we can see that because they fall for a left-right political paradigm, which I haven't said this on the air yet, but I like to say this. I hear even within the community a lot of people talking about, attacking the left. They attack the left all the time, and I see that more so than attacking the right. And I understand, because there's a lot more power coming from that ideology right at this moment. But there's no difference, and you got to realize that when you attack the left, you're bolstering the right. You
Hmm.
you're bolstering the other side of the paradigm, and that's how people will interpret that. So you have to make sure to understand it's not just left, right. It is just government. It's just the state. That's what it really is. That's what you need to
Exactly.
attack. That's the issue. And
Yep.
that's still just a symptom of the issue. But that's, you at least need to get to that point where you're
Mm.
like, okay, it's not just left and right. It's government. It's the belief in authority.
Yeah. There is no deep state. It's just the state.
Right.
Well said. Accountability, responsibility. This is where it's at, and I still see this. I mean, it's extremely prevalent that people are pointing the finger at the social engineers, right? If oh, we need to get them. If we get them out of the equation, then everything's going to be good. Nope, ain't going to happen. You're never going to know who these people are. They don't have social security numbers, birth certificates. They will be replaced. This is a family a dynasty that's been going on for thousands of years, but the power doesn't reside there. Just like you said, it resides in the individual, and the individual's doing the work, and the people give it the power, right? Hitler would have never done what he did if the people didn't consent and followed orders and gave him power, gave his ideology power, because they're the ones that are actually performing the actions. So yeah, man, I mean, well said. We have a question real quick from our good friend Brandon Spencer. Is Brandon familiar with the Egyptian? How do you say that word? J-
Jed. It's just Jed, I
Jed
believe.
pillar. Yeah,
Yeah, I
and what
believe.
it represents, it's symbolic of.
I've run into it in my studies. I'm not as fluent in that as the Greek pillars of what are they? The Ionic pillar, the Corinthian pillar, and the Doric pillars, and then there's even more than that. So I couldn't give you an exact breakdown of that on the air right now, but I have ran into that in my studies, and it is very important. I do know that, and Doug Martin probably would know about it. He probably could break it down. So.
Douglas was great when
Yep.
at Anarchadelphia. I met you briefly, but I didn't get that much time face to face to converse with you. But I spent a lot of time with Douglas and your grandma, and beautiful woman. And Douglas was just, I mean, he's a wealth of information. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if he knew that. But this makes me want to transition into um, symbolism and etymology and words, because with all my work and presentations, I like to simplify it, bring it down several notches. And you can do that by just, I mean, even defining words. Um, Relativity has just sunk its claws in all aspects of life. People think everything is relative, including words, which is the complete opposite of what a definition is. And I understand words can change, and it's good to know that and talk about that, but there is an etymology, an origin of a word, taking it from infinite possibilities to the finite.
Right. Absolutely. That's well said. Yeah, it's interesting because it's the thing itself doesn't change. That's how I look at it. It's an objective thing. It's an objective truth, right? So whenever we break down a word, we can clarify what it happens to be in a more eclectic fashion or a more precise fashion. So it's not necessarily like when I talked to, I gave that presentation at the Funnel Conference, which was on green language and was on language in general in a way. And I talked about etymology in it. So what I was trying to say in that is that, the definition, the clarity of that, we enhance the clarity of a word by understanding something more. By let's say I have bad eyesight, right? And then I use glasses to see more clear, right? To see what is in front of me more clearly. Well, that's what I was trying to say with that. So, yeah, the relative notions of, bringing out, definitions. I can't, the hypocrisy in that, the contradiction in it, in the logic, it just doesn't make any sense to me. I've always, understood that definitions are extremely important when you're trying to communicate, and obviously understanding is very important as well. But if people can't understand the words they're using based upon some kind of mode or formula, then miscommunication is obviously the result of going to be the result no matter what, right?
Mhm.
So etymology helps us to really make clear of the origins, and most likely you're going to find that the original definition of the word is more clear than the ones that we're using now, because our language has been targeted and utilized to create discourse between people, and that's one of the biggest things, because in any type of warfare, And let's not mince words here. We are in a spiritual warfare here. We have a war against our consciousness on an individual level, and on a collective level. And anything like in warfare and in warfare tactics and strategy, you're going to try to create a discord within communication, right? So if you look at any war throughout history, they're always trying to disrupt communication, because communication with clear understanding creates strong camaraderie between the individuals, where they have a wall between them where they can communicate tactics, they can communicate strategies, they can organize and formulate their plans much better. And if you can disrupt that, then you're cutting off any type of strength that two individuals that come together to fight tyranny have. So
Mhm.
we do need to understand our words. We do need to understand how our words have been obfuscated in many different ways, and how they've been intentionally, um, how they've attacked it so much that it's de-evolved to such a degree that we're pretty much just speaking in tongues, is how I would put it. You know, I mean, we
Yeah.
really have a like most people argue semantics. Like everybody's arguing about semantical issues all the time. It's like, if I'm saying this, if I'm saying natural law, and then someone else is coming in and saying God's law, but that person cannot have the pattern recognition to understand that the same thing based upon the results of that thing, are identical. It's like, what are you talking about here? It's just a semantical issue. You're just using another term for the same thing that I'm talking about. I've literally had arguments like that where people were like, "No, I'm not talking about natural law. I'm talking about God's law, and that's it. Everything you're talking about is satanic." And I'm like, "No, like literally explain what you mean by God's law." And then they go through it, and I'm like, "That's exactly what I'm saying about not natural law. It's the same thing, you
Yep.
know? It's the
Yep.
same it's the same thing. Like, what are you doing?" Like, and they're like, they still argue with you. And it's
Mhm.
it's because they're eagerly identified with the terminology rather than the actual meaning. You know, that's the thing. And that's what I always say about like anarchism and stuff. I care about the meaning of anarchy. I'm not identified with the term anarchy, right? It's the meaning that's important. It's the idea of freedom that's important. It's not about the term. You can use whatever term you want. I don't really care as long as the result is the same.
Mhm.
That's the most important part, is that we get that kind of condition, which is freedom in the absence of slavery. You know, so that's the main thing that I look at, is that the meaning has to be consistent, and it has to be in alignment with objective truth, obviously.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, words have meaning and meaning leads to purpose.
Hmm.
So all these labels in the world, they're just labels until the meaning is understood and the actions reflect the meaning, which actions could correlate to purpose. Your purpose to perform energy, act, ion, action. So yeah, and your presentation was just phenomenal, man. You condensed a lot of information in that short period of time, and it was great. So I highly recommend people go check that out. Green Language, also on your website and your channels and the Funnel website as well. But I mean, you can gain such a higher awareness just by looking at words. I read my etymology books just for shits and giggles because I'm just blown away when I come across words, and I check out their origins and the breakdowns, and then go and reference it online and see the differences. Even on something that I've used for a while, which was Eddie Online, which used to be a really solid etymology website. It has changed a little
Hmm.
bit since they came out with the app. I've seen some of the words change, and quite a bit of inaccuracies as well. So it's good to have multiple sources, and then also understand how certain languages are put together, because there's context in these languages as well, like Latin and Greek, um, that people need to understand.
Absolutely. It's funny you brought up the etymology online site, because
Yeah.
I know which one you're talking about, and I watched it change in the day, like live.
Mhm.
I went and was looking at a word, and then I went back like maybe 15, 20 minutes later, and the entire definition they had on there had been changed.
Yep.
And it was just so wild, and I was blown away by, how quickly that had happened. And then ever since then, I've just seen a downgrade of the clarity of the etymology within that site. So I used to use it a lot. But yeah, etymology books is what you really want, right? You really do want to have a good, firm understanding of your language, the roots of it. A lot of people will bring up what's called the etymological fallacy, and they'll argue this. I've heard this even against like Mark Passio's work, right?
Mhm.
And the thing is that it's a very complicated fallacy, because when someone solely bases the meaning of all of their, let's say, their premise on an etymology, right? Where like maybe that etymology wasn't as clear as it is today, because we can have that transition, right? So let's say in the past it wasn't as clear, and then today we have advanced in this etymology, and today it's more clear than what it used to be. So if you base your entire concept on the old one, it's going to be less clear than what the new one would be. But the problem is that they use this as a dismissive technique to dismiss the ones that are more clear in the past, that are more clear in their roots and in their meaning, and more aligned with objective truth, right?
Mm.
So they use this as a dismissive argument to try to make you seem like you're not, your arguments are moot, that your arguments don't stand on their own, so they'll use that. And I've had people attack me about that. And I know a lot of people have attacked Mark over that.
Mhm.
And so I brought that up. So that I call that the etymological fallacy, you know, because it's a fallacy to do that, to try to say, oh, because you're using etymological words that you're basing your concept off of, let's say like anarchy, that your entire argument now is just moot, and it has no substance and no value, because like you're talking about, it's all relative, right? So they go into this relativistic idea and this kind of postmodern thinking where, they don't even believe in objective truth, but somehow they've come to the objective truth, quote unquote, that everything's relative, right? So
Yeah.
there's a fallacy within that. There's a fundamental illogical contradiction there when people were like, "Oh yeah, I know this to be relative, and it's all like truth is relative," but yet isn't that supposed to be based on an objective truth? How did you come to understand that? So it doesn't hold up. It's a self-defeating argument, you
Mhm.
or when
Yeah.
you say that truth doesn't exist, right? Is it true that truth doesn't exist? Well, obviously you can only go one of two ways. Either it is, meaning that there is such thing as truth, or it's not, meaning that there is such thing as truth. Both ways you go, you end up at truth. It doesn't matter where you go,
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And I actually got that the comment just about 4 or 5 times recently in the last day or 2. Truth doesn't exist. No such thing as natural law.
Hmm.
Truth doesn't exist. It's like, okay, then you're on MySpace and my name's Jessica and you're Bob and actually you don't exist and I'm reading pictures. It's like you got to bring it down. Yes, we can observe, we can all see that there's a cloud in the sky, right? I mean, we're on a computer right now. We're using the internet. We're on Restream. Brandon and Will are having this conversation. And these are just basic crude examples of actual things that are based in truth. Correct. We are having a conversation right now on Restream, but yet people want to take it into this other dimension. And it actually has a lot of religious overtones to it, right? Because people don't understand how the nature of reality operates, even on the elementary level, and they don't think deeply. This is where, and I know you've talked about philosophy, where philosophy comes into play. And sure, I mean, there's many categories, but you can simplify philosophy by just having
Hmm.
that internal dialogue with yourself about big questions,
Right.
right? The difference between religion and philosophy is your philosophy, you're asking yourself these questions, the big questions, and religion, you have to ask permission and you might not even get an answer. So relativity, it's definitely a big issue. and it just and actually revisionist history is where I
Right.
was going to take it, right? I mean, we talked about etymology online, and it's clear to me, because I've been checking this site out for a few years, that as soon as the app came online, obviously some company sponsored it, got some money, provided an app, and now everything has changed. And we've seen this countless times with publication companies, and that take on the Rockefellers, that buy up publishing companies, and
Hmm.
take books off the market, or revise them. I mean, there's countless examples.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up that. I like to buy, original hardback copies of a lot of my books, even if I have them in PDF. And I'll buy like a softback too, the republished version. And then if you compare them, you can see like where there's missing pages, there's missing, content from the republished version where they've censored it. They literally have taken out a portion of the book. And it's, I mean, it's all over the board, and you're completely dead on about that. Yeah. The philosophical issue as well is that philosophy in its pure form is like what you're saying. It's a dialogue with yourself. It's a dialogue with nature to ask fundamental questions about the nature of your own mind and the nature of the universe, and to discover objective truth, because it just means, the love for wisdom. That's what the word philosophy means. So it's about coming, and wisdom is about living in harmony with objective truth and doing right action, correct conduct, and to do correct conduct, you have to have an objective truth to base that off of. You can't have right action if there is no objective truth. That's what a lot of people don't realize. So even the people that say it's all relative, at some level, they don't even live in accordance with that. You know, like some people will still have some type of moral compass to a certain degree, most of them broken because it's based on moral relativity, but sometimes that relativity is correct one time of the day, right? It's like a clock,
They'll
right?
agree
Broken
with you
clock.
that, oh, that
Yeah.
murder isn't good. It's
It's
like,
right, exactly. Right, right. So it's really interesting. But yeah, there's a philosophical issue too, because a lot of people have these arguments like, that have come from philosophy where we have concluded on the objective truth about these things. And we see this throughout history with the great, philosophers of our times. And but they're still arguing over the same thing, is my point. It's a constant argument, and then you get people who, get into nihilism, or, like let's say Nietzscheanism, and Nietzsche has some great stuff, but he takes you away from what you really need
mhm,
ultimately. He'll stimulate your mind, but he doesn't get you to the fundamental of the principles, and the real epistemology, and a lot of stuff that you really need to make a better person out of yourself, and to create correct conduct in the world, and to gain meaning in the world. So a lot of people become nihilistic, obviously, or atheistic, with a lot of these things, and they just argue constantly. They just want to argue over all these points rather than looking within, and looking at nature, and understanding the discovery process. An example of this would be like the allegory of Plato's cave, right? The allegory of Plato's cave is a great allegory. It can help you to understand how to get to objective truth. The Matrix movie is kind of a play off the allegory of the Plato's cave, right? But
mhm.
yet people can take that and warp it and manipulate it to make it seem like that what you're experiencing here is completely all relative. So people will look at even the Matrix allegory and take it and warp it and be like, "Oh yeah, this is all just a big game, a big simulation. It doesn't matter, Like
Mhm.
nothing here really matters because this is the cave, right?" And they don't realize that this is the cave and it's actually the surface as well. It's both. The
Yeah.
cave is actually the projections on the cave wall are actually politics. It's government. That's what all that is. It's the illusions, and then you climb out and you see the sun of truth and life and growth. And that's the real world. That's here too. It's spirit in the flesh.
Mhm.
So people take these things and they twist it to their own narrative, is my point, because they are fundamentally flawed in their logic and their intuitive capabilities and their pattern recognition. So yeah, philosophy is a really interesting thing. I actually coined a term a while back, and you might like this, and the people listening might like this, because the Greeks define love in many different ways. So you have like eros, philos, agape or agape, right? And they even go up to like seven and later traditions, right? But we'll stick with those three for an example. But we have agosaphy, right? Which would be a higher form of philosophy. So it's agape or agape. It's universal love for wisdom. So philos is a personal level, um, a platonic level of love, right?
Mhm.
So then you have a step above that, which is an intimate love with the universe. So universal love. So I just take the word, agape, combine it with Sophia, Sophie, agosaphy, so it's
Mm.
it's an advancement of philosophy, so it's
Excellent.
not just for me personally, it's for the entire universe, it's the love for universal knowledge, it's the love for the universal mysteries, it's the love for creating things in the universe and stewarding the universe and helping the universe and being in alignment with the one great spirit and being in alignment with your purpose here, to create freedom and to advance the species, because that's all ultimately what it is. We have to evolve our own species, and that's why they don't want us to have our own education. That's why they want to keep us dumbed down, domesticated, docile. They want to keep us dumb.
Yeah. No,
And we do it to
absolutely.
ourselves too. I want to add that we do it to ourselves also. So we got to realize that.
Yeah, that's the thing. We're consenting to slavery. I mean, you're not, I'm not, right?
Hmm.
This is why we're doing the one great work of educating people to do and inspire people to do that internal work. Um, but the majority of people in the aggregate are consenting to the current human condition. Um, the ego steps in, right, and immediately puts up blocks, and these blocks are it's so one can't look at themselves. When they see a movie like The Matrix, or Plato's Cave, right? I mean, these are great allegories of what is actually going on in a way, right? And the hero's journey is a great archetypal story that we see in movies all the time, right? And people resonate with that. They'll watch a movie like V for Vendetta, and root for the good guys that are taking down the system, but yet won't apply it to the actual natural world and our current human condition. The ego puts that block in, even though subconsciously, I think that intuition knows that something is amiss. That was something that I touched on in my presentation. But the ego definitely has a good hold on people, and I'm not one of these guys that says that we have to kill our ego. You can't do that in this reality.
Hmm.
The ego is here. The ego cannot die, and you breathe as well, right? But a dominant ego, where the ego is in full control, definitely restricts one's inner sight to evaluate themselves and look at themselves deep within and see these blocks.
Right. Yeah, I'd like to talk about the ego. I agree with you. The idea of the ego needing to be killed or ego death is a misnomer, and it's propagated by the New Age movement, obviously.
Mhm.
And it's a misunderstanding of your own psychology. The ego is a tool, and it's a very useful tool when it's in its proper position. The ego simply means I, and it's about self identification, it's about individualization. So, if I didn't have my ego as an example of this, I couldn't determine the difference between me and the things around me. I would have no comparison because I can't identify with myself. So let's say I'm standing under a tree, I wouldn't be able to understand that I am not the tree. And there's a reason why you have to understand that. And there is a biological and consciousness reason for that. It's because of protection. Okay. And I know a lot of people won't like that, but it's true, because if that tree decides to fall on you, not the sides, but if it happens to fall on you, right,
Mhm.
you need to be able to protect yourself in order to survive so that you can continue to develop and grow and evolve and things like this. But if you think you're the tree, it doesn't matter if the tree falls on you because you're the tree. You're
Mhm.
falling with the tree. You are the tree. It doesn't matter. So if it falls on you, and you die, there's no point in it, right? So, but we don't want to take it so far that we separate ourselves from nature, obviously, right? So there has to be a balance between understanding the individualization process that I am, I am not the tree, but also that I am connected to the tree, you know?
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
that healthy balance, and we can look at the current human condition, right? We see, like we were just talking about, relativism and people identifying with whatever they want, right? So
Mhm.
it's this misdirection that is fully disconnecting people from that higher self and the interconnectedness of nature and source and the natural universal spirit. Um, which it's just it's mind-blowing, the shit that we see nowadays, with people that what they identify with and that
Oh God.
disconnect. And I tell people, speaking truth, there is a level of acceptance, not accepting slavery or violence, but accepting that you you can do what you can do, but yet you can't force someone to change internally.
Right.
So, and what that means is to constantly um, do that self synthesis, the deep shadow work of bettering yourself, right? It's a continual process where you can find um, better ways to be creative and communicate information and truth to people. So I see a lot of people, especially in the quote unquote truth freedom movement. Um, they definitely there's no hope. We can't change. You can't change someone. So if I can't change my dad or my mom, then I can't change anyone, and they give up. Right. So this nihilistic mindset that people are in, when in reality, the correct thought process is, well, how can I change myself to communicate better, to influence or inspire um, more effectively? And like you said in the very beginning of this, right? We're in this for the long haul.
Mhm.
Thousands and thousands of years of slavery. We're not going to do this in one lifetime, but yet it's a stepwise progression so we can pass the torch to the younger generation, and they can take and hopefully have a head start, or I mean, how you were raised, that's great with your father, giving you extremely aware information. I mean, that's awesome. I'm trying to be that same type of model to my daughter, um, but not shelter her from the world, speak
Right.
plainly and truthfully, but also truly educate as best as possible. My dog.
Right.
My
I
dog.
just noticed we both got dogs.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
I can see your dog in the background.
Yeah, she's playing with something. I don't know what she got a hold of, but yeah, I agree with you. The old quote from Gandhi is "Be the change you want to see in the world." You know, so
Yeah.
that's what it has to be. Everybody's seeking to change everybody else without changing themselves, and it all starts with the self. If you can't see it within yourself, then how do you expect it to see it within the external or within the other worlds? You know, or the other people. I mean, and so the hidden treasure is within the self, right? So know thyself and you will know the universe and the gods. You know, that's the old oracle quote, right?
Yeah.
Delphi.
Delphi. Yeah. Yeah.
So that's really important to know thyself, and that's what this all comes down to: is more self knowledge, more self awareness, and then being able to be activated with that. Um, so yeah, I think it's really important to understand that, relativism is a huge downfall in the ability for the species to evolve itself, because it leaves everything up in the air to be at the whims of everybody's perception, you know? And if it's at the whims of everybody's perception, then there's no learning methodology. There's no point in learning. There's no point in doing anything, you know? There's no point in even existing or breathing, or, there's no point for you to even survive. There's no point for anything in the world. And that's one of the biggest issues I do see, like you talked about, is that not only that people don't believe in meaning or purpose in the world, but if they do, if they happen to be in the truth community and stuff like this, they're kind of activated, they do have some knowledge, they do feel powerless, right? So they feel powerless and they don't know how to approach the problems at hand, right? They don't know how to approach the iniquities and inequities that are plaguing the world at this point, right? And
Mm.
all the suffering that's going on. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to show you, trying to show everybody that you do have the power. The illusion is that you don't have the power. That's the ego. That's the ego block. that makes you not do anything. That's the fear. And that's what the dark occultists rely upon, is for you to believe that either there's no purpose and everything's relative, or that even if it's not relative and there is purpose, it doesn't matter, because how can I create change in the world? You know, and you always hear this, like, everybody's like, no, one man can't create change in the world. So that, that always, one person can't change the world, right?
Mhm.
That old saying. And it's like, no, that's how it all starts, is by one person. And then the world changes, it always starts with the one person.
Yeah,
So I think that's what the whole show has been about, the individual, the individualization, a lot of people
exactly.
take it to the extreme too, where you can't be so individualized that you can't connect with other people. That's what I was talking about with the tree, right? You don't want to be so individualized that you can't connect with other people's suffering, because if you can't do that, then it's just freedom for you and it doesn't matter for other people. And that's not true freedom. True freedom is a relationship between all of us. It's, if I'm not free, then you're not free. If you're not free, I'm not free. That's the
Yeah,
thing. But we also want to stay out of the victimization idea as well. So we have to stay in our power of sovereignty, empowerment, our spiritual empowerment. We got to be spiritual warriors here, you know. So I'm not a slave, but I'm in a condition of slavery, you know. You could say
yeah,
I'm a slave. They can say I'm a slave, but I'm going to tell them to their face, I am not a slave, and I'm not going to back down, because I am not inherently a slave. I'm inherently a free, sovereign being in this universe, and you're not going to take my freedom. You're not going to usurp it anymore, and I'm not going to allow that to, be passed down to the next generation, on to progeny. You know, so I'd rather have the suffering hit me than progeny, right? I'd
yeah,
rather take the blunt of that than pass it down, and that's what most of these parents do. They're like, oh, I don't need to worry about this. And what happens is that the failures of them get passed down to the next generation. The failures of our parents get passed down to us. And obviously none of us are perfect, so we're going to have some failures that get passed down. So don't beat yourself up about that either. But we do the best we can. And you can't just sit back and do nothing. You don't want to be lackadaisical. You don't want to be lazy or cowardly, right? Because
yeah,
that's what we really see is cowardness. It's just everybody's cowards. They're the cowardly lion, and they have not been anointed to the kingship, of themselves. So
exactly.
it's a big issue.
Yeah, man, well said. I mean, this is what the social engineers wanna do with, how you were mentioning relativism. It ultimately, it severs communication. Communication from each other and ourselves and the natural world, right? Because I mean, this is what they don't want to happen. They don't want that connect so you commune and communicate with nature, which is all encompassing. And yeah, I mean, poof, you said some great shit. How I feel and how I've been feeling for a while, it's like, if you're not talking about freedom, what it is, how do we achieve it, then what the fuck are you doing? Because,
Right.
I mean, first, obviously, someone needs to recognize the problem and make a correct diagnosis, which
Hmm.
means by way of knowledge, but then activate and get on the battlefield, which the battlefield right now is creating content while we can, and also going out in, local communities and talking with people, sure, but you want to be effective. One of my greatest um, shadows that haunts me and I accept is when my daughter gets older. She's 9 now, and I want her to, if she looks me in the eye when she's older and says, "Dad, what did you do to contribute to freedom when I was younger or in the world," right? I want to prove it, not just say it. Oh, well, I did this, I did that. I want to prove it. And when we're doing conversations like this, when we're creating content effectively, you're immortalizing a message and you're putting it out to the world that can be accessed when we're gone, right? Uh I'm pretty much creating like a video diary that I can leave my daughter if I might move on from this world, prematurely, which hopefully not. I'm in it for the long haul, but we'll see. It all depends on what the beard thinks. Um, but yeah, I mean, doing it, the kids, the children can't, and a lot of people say, oh, it's all about the children, and it is, but the children are not going to remedy this situation. The
Right.
parents are, but the parents need that awareness. So it's definitely, it is a war. It's a war for souls, and it's definitely serious. And I try to stay grounded and centered, and I recommend this for people as well. Don't let the social engineers, don't give them that satisfaction of corrupting and having an internal, your internal ecology just full of chaos. That's part of the whole gimmick too, right? Oh, as soon as you gain awareness of what's going on in the natural world, then you won't be able to handle it because you don't have the tools internally in your psychology and your emotions and physically as well, that you'll just shrivel up inside. So this is why the individual and the internal ecology is so important. So that way we can prove it externally.
Absolutely, and well said. And that's powerful what you said about, what am I going to show my daughter or my child, where I've applied myself in this world and how I've helped the world grow into freedom. Most people would never ask themselves that, you know. So just for you to say that and state that, that just shows how amazingly conscious you are as a parent. So I thank you for being a conscious parent in that arena, because we need more people to ask those questions, like, hey,
Yeah.
how am I going to, approach that if my child, let alone if your child ever does that because you socially, engineered them yourself, or you, made them docile, a little puppet just to follow you around like another slave,
Hmm.
because it's just like a Russian doll syndrome of slavery, right? It
Yeah.
just trickles down through the hierarchy. So it's really
Generational
interesting.
mind control.
Yep, generational mind control. That's right. So another thing I like to say about the relativism is that a lot of people, especially religious people, they don't really consider what happens here that matters very much to them, because they believe they're going to go to another place.
Mm.
And this is a what's called an eschatological issue, okay? Which is, what that means is the final resting place of the soul. Final things is what it really means. So eschatology is the study of, like, the afterlife or final things and things like this. So they think it matters to a certain degree, but then ultimately they really don't, because they don't ever stand up and do anything about what's going on. You know, so if you're not actually taking action to change the world, do you really care? Can you really say you know what's going on? Can you really say you understand it? And can you really say that you actually care? You know, because you
Mhm.
don't. I don't think so. You may claim that, but you don't have gnosis of that. You don't have a deep understanding, an intimate understanding of the suffering that we're all going through, and that's why you're not doing anything. So that's why we need more solutions. This is a big issue as well, is that people expect me or you to have all the solutions to all the problems in the world because we're trying to change the world on an individual level. It's like, no, that's another straw man argument. You're trying to put me into a position where I cannot defend my arguments by saying, since you're not a nuclear engineer, how are you going to deal with the nuclear power plants when you're in a stateless society? It's like, no, there's other people, the other people who have those skills. That's what the roundtable's about. You talk to them about that. They'll have the solutions to that. I don't have a solution to that. You know, I'm not meant to have all the knowledge on all areas in the entire world. I'm not omnipotent. I'm not omnipresent. I'm not a god. That's the whole point. Everybody wants to be God here. And then when you go to try to change the world into a more free world, and you're trying to help them, you're trying to actually help those people who are enslaved. They're like, oh, well, if you can't solve all the other problems of the world when we're free, then I'm not going to listen to your arguments. Why would I ever listen to you? Because you can't figure out how to do this one thing over here where you've never studied that at all. And it's
Mm.
like, okay, it's a fallacy.
Yeah.
It's a straw man fallacy, and you're trying to dismiss the entire argument. And what sucks is that it keeps people enslaved, because people are more worried about the utilitarianism and pragmatism of, like, how the system would work. And I know I've talked about this recently on many shows, but they're more worried about that rather than actually achieving freedom. Freedom has to come first. All those other things, we already know how to do those things. Infrastructure, organization, all these things that we'll have. without coercive governments, without slavery. You know, we already understand how to do those things. So it's not like that knowledge is going to change. For example, magically, because we're free, we're all going to lose the ability or the knowledge of how to take care of the roads. You know,
Yeah,
like, really? I mean, seriously, how ignorant are you? You know, like, magically, we're just not going to take care of our own roads, which I have to personally use to get to places. You know, so I have an incentive to want to take care of them. And then if a community comes together to work on them without a third party stealing from us to get that done, which they usually don't get it done anyways, somehow they're just going to magically be destroyed, right? They're just going to magically fall apart. And it's like, no, actually, they're falling apart now because we're living in tyranny. You know, that's the problem.
exactly.
Because that system of taxation not only is unethical and immoral, but it's inefficient to deal with local community issues, you know, and it's inefficient to deal with collective issues as well. Because no matter what, the evil always has within it the seeds of its own destruction. It cannot continuously perpetuate because within itself there is a solution to it, and it's going to destroy itself. It's going to start to devour itself. And you see this. It's like hierarchies fighting other hierarchies constantly, and the dark occult are up here just watching it, right? So
Mhm.
you got all these towers coming up and devouring each other, right? But they never get to the pinnacle. And I wanted to point out one more thing. I know this is a long rant, but
No, it's all good.
you said something really important that I always talk about with people, and it blows them away. And I'm like, you were talking about, you know, that if you took out these elite people, that what would happen, right? Well, you have hundreds of thousands, millions of people in the same mindset, and they would willfully take up those positions of authority. They would willfully. I know people who would be like, "Oh yeah, I would love to be a rich, you know, pedophilic elite person." You know, I've never met anybody that said they wanted to be a pedophile, obviously, but you get my point. Because of the
Yeah.
money, because of the standard of living, their living would be increased. They can do more things, obviously, because of this. But people would willfully and without hesitation take up those positions, right? And the other thing that you mentioned is that you'll never know these people. And it's true. They don't have social security cards. Even their bloodlines are completely obscure now. You know, you think that you can track their bloodlines now? You're crazy. They have such advanced technologies. There's no way you're going to track these family bloodlines anymore. You
Yeah,
know,
no way.
yeah, you think that you're going to find these people at your local freaking Walmart or a shopping center? No, you're not. You know, these people have everything set up for them. They own all that. And then also you think it's all about money as well. That this world that the elites only want this because it's about money and getting more rich. No. No, it's not. That's low level, you know. That's underneath them. They don't need that. They print the money. You know,
Mhm.
they make the money. They don't need that. So even if a society collapses and the currency goes away and devalues itself to zero, it doesn't matter, because the next totalitarian society that comes up, they'll print that money. It doesn't matter to them because they have such control and they understand this stuff. They're not doing this for money. They're doing this for the control of the population. That's it. They're doing it to make us slaves perpetually, to perfect slavery. And that's it, you know? And people still think it's an economic issue. And people still in the conspiratorial movements think that they're going to be able to trace down these bloodlines. And I'm not saying don't do your work into the bloodlines, because that's important, like the 13 Illuminati bloodlines and, you know, anything like that, you know, that's good. And I get the idea of wanting to bring an individual to justice, because we do. We have an incentive to want to, you know, like actually create, you know, justice in the world, and we want
Mhm.
to bring justice in the world. But don't confuse that with thinking that you're going to find these people.
There's
You
no
know,
change that lies there as well.
no, no, no. There's no change there. You know, absolutely right. It's not getting to causality. It's just a symptom. They are a symptom as well. You know, they're a symptom of that mindset, of the dogma, of the false beliefs. All the sorcerer has to do is to give you his mindset, right? That's,
Exactly.
and that's what they do. You know, they just put out a little bit here and there, and then we take it and run with it. They inject a little toxicity into the society, and we take it and run with it. And then we fluoridate our own water. You know, we poison our own air. You know, we spray ourselves like bugs constantly.
Yeah.
So
The mindset is holographic, it's self-similar. Like you said, the
Right.
sorcerer gives the people, their own mindset, and then the people will do whatever they want. Um, Again, the domestication of humanity, which majority of people, they identify with the abuser, they identify with their slavery, and then they justify it. Like, oh, well, human beings can't create roads. We need the state to do that. So the state
Mhm.
ultimately, that
Right.
system is narcissistic. It's just like a narcissistic abuser, really a parasite, right? Because,
Mhm.
like you said, it's not about money; it's about souls and the energy that the soul creates, that they feed off of. So that it ultimately is like a parasite living at another's expense,
Right. Right.
so
Right.
they can play God.
Yeah, they got us believing in social Darwinism, you know? I mean, that's what this is all about. Survival of the most ruthless, right?
Hmm.
Survival of the most psychopathic. So they build an incentive for the population to be the most psychopathic that they can be. You know, we breed
Yep.
secondary psychopaths throughout society. I mean, a great allegory of psychopathy would be like the Batman movie, right?
Mm.
With the Joker and Batman. You know, they're both kind of borderline psychopaths, you know?
Yeah.
It's a really interesting concept when you get into that. And Batman himself kind of represents the archetypal Satan, you know, and then what happens when Batman saves everybody? He brings in the police force. You know, there's always escalation of more order followers. You know, you think he's the hero, right? And you're like, oh yeah, you know, he's a great detective. And don't get me wrong, I like Batman. You know, I'm not saying I don't like Batman because I, as a kid, grew up with Batman and it was always my favorite hero out of all of them. But it's probably because of the dark stuff that comes along with it, because he represents the shadow, the dark side of ourselves, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, a-
Absolutely.
but the point is that he brings in the police state. You know, it always
Yep.
increases in the police in Gotham City, right? So it's always escalation. You know, the Joker comes up, he battles the Joker, and then the police come in, and then they try to take out Batman, and then start working with Batman again, and it's always this crazy, battle of escalation between these psychopathic parasites. And he's
Mhm.
not really getting to the root of the issue. Batman isn't, right? He doesn't ever get to the root of the problem. He's not willing to go all the way even though he's supposed to be the world's greatest detective.
Mhm.
He's not willing to go all the way and understand natural law and understand causality, which lies in the mind. You know,
Exactly.
yeah. So I wanted to bring that up because I think that's pretty interesting, and I made a meme about that years ago about Batman. He was standing in front of all these police cars, and it says, I think it was the Rise of the Dark Knight or something like that. And I said, Rise of the Police State,
Mhm.
So,
Yeah. It's a good it's a great allegory and a lesson. A lot of there's a lot of content out there, right? And I always tell people, whoever you're following, wherever the source of your information is, what principles, what is their core message? Because
right.
if it has to do with anything with the state, right, then it's bullshit.
Yep.
And that doesn't mean that you throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Right, right,
But for an example, and I'll say it like Del Bigtree, I've mentioned this before, right? His ultimate solution is safer vaccines. When the correct response is to be a vaccine abolitionist, just like
right,
I'm an
right.
abolitionist for government, right? Because it's inherently immoral. So it's all about that core message, and a lot of these groups or information, they always kind of give you the runaround, and it ends at some type of political solution where government is just reinstated. So
Right, right. Yeah, we always see that in a lot of these films and movies and even comic books and all kinds of stuff. It's always about promoting that government. I mean, if you look at the comic book industry, you see how much propaganda came from that.
mm,
Go back to World War I and World War II, and you can see first of all they got extremely censored at that time period. Where a lot of the comics that were standing against the state and stuff like that were completely destroyed. And then you have a promotion of these very sanitized versions of these heroes and stuff. And then it's all status propaganda, all of it
yeah.
constantly throughout the history. And so art is really important because art can either destroy a nation or it can, enhance a nation, right? It can destroy a society or it can evolve a society. Because I'm not saying it's a tool, I'm just saying it's a
Hmm.
tool, is what I say. It's a tool. It can be art is used to preserve great esoteric knowledge, great wisdom throughout the ages, great time periods, even some of the most historical um, relevant things in our history comes from understanding the art of that culture. So if you look at the Greek culture, you can tell what kind of mindset is going on because of the art that's taking place in that culture at that time period. Is it degenerate? Is it degenerating? Like what's
Hmm.
it trying to represent? So if you look at the art, you can really follow like the mindset of the culture itself. So, but also art can be used as a information weapon, to control the society, obviously. And we see that with a lot of things. So,
That's great.
I'm not trying to demonize art, by the way. I'm just saying, it's a weapon and you can
Yeah.
use it positively or negatively.
Absolutely. Just like, I mean, art is in artificial. Artificial means man-made, but yet what is it used for? Right? Artificial can align with the natural. Um,
Right.
but it could also be for degradation of humanity as well.
Oh,
So,
man, you just brought up a point. I wasn't going to bring that up, but I wanted to talk to you about that. I almost texted it to you earlier
yeah,
because I see a lot of people who are like anarcho primitivist or naturalist to such a degree that they think that all technology should be purged, right? And that there's no place for artificialness or even illusions in the world, right? Well, no, that's not true, And if you do deep work and you do your own discernment, you really enhance your philosophy, you can understand that there is a place for artificial things in the world. Like you said, it's man-made. We're using artificial stuff right here. The image that you're watching right now is not actually me. It's an artificial projection of me, you know?
exactly.
So like there's good things for that. And I think that there's a big divide with people with that. And I think people fear technology because they have this subconscious fear of becoming obsolete, you know? And it's always been throughout history. Like anytime there's a new technology, people have always feared becoming obsolete in that area. So we have to understand that technology is not the issue. It's just the level of consciousness wielding the technology and what we're doing with that technology. So a lot of people might not like me for this, but I'm not scared of AI. You know what I'm scared of? I'm scared of AI being controlled by an authoritarian regime. I'm scared of a child system AI that's developed with a military background through militarized purposes. It's just like raising a child that you already have, in a military family, you know, and then they become a soldier in a military. So I'm not worried about AI. I'm worried about how we're developing and how we're training and teaching those things and what we're doing with those things and what we're stimulating, what we're programming into that and what it's going to use with that. So I'm not really
Totally.
yeah, I'm not concerned about it if I'm living in a free state. I think there can be great uses for it in a free state, you know? But a lot of people don't want to talk about that, especially in the conspiratorial movements because they're scared. They're scared of
Exactly.
what that means because they have self-conscious issues, they have self-esteem issues when it comes to technology.
Yeah. And I would even say most of them are ignorant to technology.
Yes.
Through that preconceived notion of anti-technology, right? They don't have any knowledge for that technology in general. So I agree with you 100%. And even in my presentation, which was heavily focused around animism, right? Animism
Hmm.
is all about using technology, but using it in symbiosis to nature, the natural world, and its fellow beings.
Right.
So I agree with you 100% for sure. And
Yeah.
this is why it's so important to learn tech right now. And that's why I said earlier, it is the battlefield at this current moment.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, when technology is aligned with nature and natural law and it has the principles underneath of it, we have moral philosophies underneath of it and ethics behind it, then it's always going to advance the species. I am totally not wanting to go back to living in caves. I think that's a horrible idea. I think it's a devolution, devolution. So or a devolution meaning like a devil. So
Exactly. Yeah. We are
but
lower sea creators, right? We're a holographic version,
Right.
a fractal of source, the all. So we can create. This is what humans do. Humans create. They can take natural elements and then make something artificial that can be used for prosperity, the evolution, and connection with source and nature.
Right. Yeah, that's what we should be doing. And also it's a pipe dream to think that that kind of ingenuity is just going to go away, you know, like just magically, like people are going to stop creating things, you
Yeah,
know. It's like, oh, really? You just think we're just going to become stagnant and just not create things? You know, that's what we want to do. We have a natural incentive to build things in this world, you know.
absolutely. Yes,
Even the most ancient cultures have always developed and built and advanced themselves, you know, with agriculture, with their, you know, their housing, with their society structures, all kinds of stuff, tools, you know, implements, the way that they've developed their implements, building their great temples, you know. So it's like it's totally ignorant when I hear that from people. I'm just like, what are you talking about? Like, if you personally want to go live in a cave, that's fine. I don't have an issue with that. But if you're trying to promote that as a societal solution and you're not even talking about natural law with it, then I'm like, I'm stepping back, you know?
yeah, that's just one extreme side of the polarity that's completely in imbalance. So yeah, no, I totally agree with you, man. I think I know we're almost coming on an hour and a half. Man,
Yep.
time flies, dude. I could talk to you for so long, but that was a
Right.
good that was a really good spiel, and that's a good place to end on too, the technology bid. Real quick, we'll wrap it up, but any any hopes for a future seed conference?
Oh yeah. I'm currently in the early phases of organizing Seed 5. Um, and here soon I will be putting out some, you know, information about who's going to be there and, you know, gathering speakers. And I can give you an estimate date. This can be subject to change, obviously, but hopefully it's going to be May of next year. And I always like doing it in May because I like to subvert the dark occult rituals going on during the season of sacrifice. So, you know, I'm shooting for early May if possible. So I like to do it right around that time period. That's when I've always done it. You know, but yeah, Seed 5 definitely in the works. Real excited for it. It's going to be awesome. You know, hopefully get you back on there, get some other people back on there. I mean, it's going to be excellent. You know, I'm ready to take what I learned from your guys' conference and put it into effect and hopefully continue this train, you know, and keep expanding with it.
I love it, man. If that's an official invite, my answer is yes.
Yeah,
I'm looking forward
absolutely.
to it. That's great,
Absolutely.
man. Yeah, no, that's good to hear. And so talk about seedtruth.com. That's your main website?
Yeah, that's my new website I just you know, published here the past year. That's where you can find most of my work at. You can also find my work at the Cubbyhole website, cubbyhole.com, cubbyWhole.com. And that's me and Nate Cap who do that podcast. I'm a co-host on that. We just did a really cool show on green language on there. People should check out. And then I'm on the One Great Work, you know, website as well, the One Great Work Network. So you can find my work there.
Yeah, brother. That's awesome. Yeah, I got those links. I'll put them in the description. The Cubbyhole podcast is, I mean, dude, that is phenomenal. Any viewers that have not checked it out, go to number one and just work your way all the way up. Shout out to Nate Cap, Douglas Martin's on there, and you, of course. I mean, you guys are doing some great work, man. Um, I appreciate you so much, Brandon. Thanks for coming on, and we will do more of these chats for sure because I can talk to you for hours, brother.
Absolutely, Will. Anytime. And thank you for having me on again, man.
For sure. My pleasure. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for tuning in. And we will check, you can check out my work on the One Great Work Network as well. And again, I appreciate y'all. Y'all have a good night.